All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning. Share to thank our Talmud Torah sponsor for the month of Iyar, an anonymous sponsorship with Akar Satov to Hashem, for all of the blessings He has bestowed upon us, for the Refushim of Devorah Leah Bas Chai Rivka. May we all be zocheh to witness the imminent coming of Mashiach Meher Rabbi Yameinu. Amen. To thank our week of learning sponsors, Milt and Melanie Gertner, in honor of the wedding of their son Drew Ari to Shira Shemulian in Yerushalayim. Mazel tov to the Chassan and Kalim. May they be zocheh merchant to the Bayis Neman Be Yisrael. Ameh ve'esem shanim tovo. So our Daf Yomi sponsor for today, Razy Eskin, in memory of her husband Bill Eskin, Zichron Livrach, whose yahrzeit is today, and Leah Natan Berry, in memory of Bill Eskin, whose first yahrzeit is today. Bill was a long time online member of our Daf Yomi. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, his neshama will have an aliyah and his family a nechama. So with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, mamish a lot to do today. Today's daf is Tzadik Gimel 93. We are picking up on Tzadik Beis Amud Beis 92b, and we are picking up right from, if you see Tosas Ihachi, with that Aleph Hey Shemishik over there. So that is where we're picking up. So also remember again, we're picking up in the middle of a very interesting sugya regarding the entitlement of a worker to eat. And the Gemara is trying to clarify, the Gemara is trying to analyze one simple and core basic issue, which is that, how do we view halachically that entitlement? Is that entitlement considered to be an extension of the worker's wage? So in other words, the employer pays him X, but there's always an add-on to that wage, and that add-on is in the form of whatever, right? All you can eat, and all you can eat employments, right? Or is it no? Essentially, it's a matana. It's a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No different than the other various gifts that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives out, let's say, for example, to the poor. So this is an additional entitlement that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives to the laborer. That is the fundamental shaila. So the Gemara says as follows. We kind of left off in the middle of a discussion over here. So let's say if a person went ahead and hired workers, because let's say again, I hired Ruvain because my barrels of wine opened up. I need someone to reseal it. So the Gemara said, if Ruvain realized that he was hired for that purpose, then ultimately again, then halacha l'maisa, he doesn't go, he works, but he doesn't get to eat. He doesn't get to eat because that's already a product that is subject to meiser. But if he didn't realize that that's what it was, then halacha l'maisa, I have to redeem some of it and allow him to drink or allow him to eat while he works. The Gemara says, I don't understand what possible mekachtos could there be. After all, if he knows that he's being hired to seal up barrels, he understands that the product, that the produce, or that the item that he's working with is already subject to meiser. To which the Gemara says, "My mekachtos iga made the other the itpul meiser amarav sheishes sheniftechu chaviosav labar." What's the case? The case is where the barrels opened up and they flowed back into the cistern. So therefore, again, I will say, when Reuven shows up for work, thinking that he's dealing with wine that's in the cistern may not be subject to meiser. So he might have thought that he's getting to work with produce that's not yet subject to tithing obligations, and therefore be able to eat. I the Gemara says, "Vatanya yain mishiyar the bar yain shi mishiyar the bar." So we learned that Allah l'maisa, when is wine subject to tithing obligations? As soon as it gathers in the cistern. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva, Dar Mishi Yikveh. So we'll say, no, because we're over here passing like Rabbi Akiva. And we'll say, interestingly enough, Rabbi Akiva holds that halacha l'maisa, wine in the cistern doesn't become subject to meiser. When does wine become subject to meiser? When it begins to froth on top. When that froth begins to form, that's when it's subject to meiser. Da amrulei lo hava yadinan. Gemara says, and because the workers could show up, right? The worker could show up. Reuven could say to me, listen, I showed up for work. I had no idea that this wine was already subject to tithing. I thought I was coming to eat, right, while I work. Now I can't eat. And therefore there's a shtick on mechachtos, to which the Gemara says, so I'll say, but why can't I say back to Reuven, but you should have recognized that even though the wine is still in the cistern, it's possible that it already frothed, right? And the froth was removed, and therefore you should have realized that there's the possibility that you wouldn't be able to eat. To which the Gemara says, you should have done your due diligence. So I'll say, because we're dealing with a situation where the person, interesting, that in this locale it was customary that the person who removed the wine from the vat to put it into the barrels would also be the person who removed the froth. That's the way it would have worked. So therefore, again, Reuven assumed that since he was being hired to put the wine from the vat or from the cistern into the barrels, he would have also removed the froth, which means that he assumed that he was dealing with produce that was not yet subject to meiser, and therefore should have been entitled to eat. When he shows up and it's not like that, it's a little bit of a mekachtos, and therefore again, I, the employer, have an obligation to remedy that by tithing some of the produce and allowing him to eat. The Gemara says, "V'hashta detani." Now that we learned, "V'hashta detani Rav Zavid b'dvei Rav Yoshia yai misher the bar v'yikveh." They will say, now that we learned another machlokes over here, that when does wine become subject to tithing? When it goes into the cistern and the froth is skimmed from the top. Rabbi Akiva Omer mishi yishle bechavios. Rabbi Akiva says no. It's when it's supposed to say, so alternate version of Rabbi Akiva, that it's when the wine is put into the barrels, and then in the barrels the froth is removed from the top. Then if that's the case, afilu tema shalonis bechu Shilonis paschu chavios of the bar. So I was saying, me dealing with a case where the barrels didn't open back up into the cistern. The amarle lo haviadin and demashli, because he could say I had no idea that the froth was removed, that it was put into the barrels and the froth was removed. I have a name luhui by lechol asuke adataychu dilmashli. But why can't we say to the worker, you should have had in mind that maybe this occurred? To which the word is ba'asra dahu desharik hahu mashli. We're dealing in a case, we'll say, where the local custom was that the person who goes out and seals the barrel is the person who removes the froth from the barrel as well. So therefore, the worker had every right to think that this was untithed produce. So tashma. So we'll say, so again, remember, all of this is only brought down. We're still trying to figure out our core question. What is the nature of the entitlement? Is it in addition to the worker's wage, or is it a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Okay, so we cannot conclusively prove that from this previous discussion. Let's go weiter. Says the Gemara, we'll say an interesting idea. Actually, I want to point out, this is actually our next Mishnah. So we're going to save ourselves a little bit of time, because we'll say, again, we're going to literally do the next Mishnah right now. So when we get to the next Mishnah, we'll pick up a few moments. Tashma, Kotzeitz Adam Ayidei Atzmo. So we'll say this is actually interesting halacha. Now, Kotzeitz Adam Ayidei Atzmo means the following, that halacha l'maaseh, if you look at Rashi says over here, it's like about 6 lines up from before the lines get wide. Kotzeitz litol ma'os v'lo yochal ayidei atzmo b'shel asma. So we'll say now, this entire time what we've been focusing on is the ability of a worker, or the right, the entitlement of a worker to eat while he works. Well, there's another alternate possibility, which is the worker could agree to accept payment in lieu of eating. So for example, right, I hire Reuven to work my field. I say, Reuven, here's the deal. If you give up your right to go ahead and eat while you work, I'll pay you an extra $100 a day. Right? That's what it means when it says Kotzeitz Adam Ayidei Atzmo, that a person could go ahead and enter into an agreement with the employer to give up the right to consume for money. Furthermore, Ayidei bino ubito hagidolim. Ayidei avdov shivchas hagidolim, vayidei ishto mipnei sheyesh bo endas. So we'll say not only that, but halacha l'maisa, a person could enter into this same agreement on behalf of his family members. So let's say I hire Reuven and his wife to work for me, or I hire Reuven and his adult children, or Reuven and his adult servants. So Reuven has the right to go ahead and enter into this same arrangement to give up right to eat for more money, and he could enter into that arrangement for any of his adult relatives or adult servants who are working along with him in the field. Now, what's the logic? Rashi points out over here, since these people have das, they're adults. So because adults have das, therefore again they have the ability to forego the right to consume for more money, for more wage. Okay, the Gemara says, however, but however, I will say, if let's say again I hire Reuven, and together with Reuven his minor kids, right? His minor kids come to work with him, or his minor servants come to work with him, or he brings his animal. So I will say, in those cases, Reuven can't negotiate the giving up of that entitlement to consume for more money. Why? Because since these individuals don't have das, they're ketanim or an animal. So l'maisa, without das, you can't give up a right. Can't give up a right. A very interesting halacha. To which the Gemara says, so I'll say, so now we're assuming over here that we're dealing with the situation of where Reuven Ruvain is supporting all of these people in question, right? Ruvain provides for the physical sustenance, for the mizonos of all of these people. So because he provides for the mizonos of these people, therefore he has the right to negotiate the giving up of the right of consumption, bless you, on their behalf. That's what we're assuming over here. The Gemara says, now watch this. So now it makes sense. So when it comes to, let's say, his minor children, minor servants, so the reason why halacha l'maisa he can't negotiate on their behalf to give up that right is because that's not his right to negotiate. Right? After all, again, that's their entitlement from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, again, he can't give that up on their behalf. Now, the adults have the das, therefore they can give that up on their own behalf. I will say, if you understand ultimately, again, that the entitlement for consumption is an extension of Ruvain, the laborer's right, it's his own right, then the Gemara says, it's the function of the wage. Then the Gemara says, "Katanim nami naketzluhu." You should even be able to go ahead and give up this right on behalf of kitanim, because they're also receiving a wage. Therefore, it's a function of their wage. They should be able to forego it. To which the Gemara says, "Hachamar what's the case over here? Kishein ma'ale lahen mazonos." No. The case over here actually is where Ruvain is actually not supporting these individuals. He's not providing for their physical needs. Ihachi gedolim nami. But if that's the case, then how could he negotiate this for Gidolim, for adults? No, adults are different. Gidolim yodi v'kamachli. Adults are different because adults know what's going on, and therefore, again, they have the right to be mochel on a right. V'hatani Raboshia kotetz adam ayidei atzmo v'ayidei ishto aval lo ayidei behemto v'lo ayidei beno ubito hagidolim aval lo ayidei beno ubito hakitanim v'kotetz ayidei avdo v'shivchas hakitanim ben gidolim ben kitanim. So I'll say so again, but what do you do with this statement of Rav Oshia, right? Rav Oshia says that a person has the ability to give up the right for consumption and for himself and for his wife, but not for his animal, not for his adult children, not for his minor children, but he can go ahead and negotiate it for his avadim, whether they're adults or whether they're children. So the Gemara says, "My love, idi v'idi ma'ale mazonos." So we're not talking about a case where ultimately, again, he is supporting these individuals. I'm sorry, so what's the machlokes over here? Demar savar mishalahu ochel, umar savar mishal shamayim ochel. And maybe the fundamental machlokes in these two versions of this halacha is the nature of the entitlement for consumption. One opinion holds that the entitlement is an extension of the worker's wage, and the other opinion holds that it's a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to which the Gemara says, "Lo." No, everyone agrees that the right of a worker, right, the entitlement of a worker to eat, ultimately is an extension of his wage. V'lo kasha kan b'shein ma'ale hamazonos u'braisa b'ma'ale hamazonos. And I will say, could it very well be that it's talking about two different cases. The Mishnah is talking about a case where Ruvain, the father, husband, right worker, goes ahead and supports everyone who's working alongside of him, and the Braisa is talking about a case where he doesn't. So the Gemara says, okay, b'ma'al kimta, b'ma'al hamazonos. So how have you established this? As a case where the father is supporting everyone. So the Gemara says, Ihachi ketanim nami nachatzluhu. So if that's the case, again, he should be able to negotiate the foregoing of this right even for his minor children or minor avadim. To which the Gemara says, the tzarayu dibino bito haktanim lo zachi le rachmana. No, it doesn't work that way. What do you mean it doesn't work that way? Now remember again, when a worker has to give up the ability to eat while he's going out and working, there's a certain element of tsar, of pain and suffering that's there. A father doesn't have the right over the tsar, ultimately, of his minor children. Okay, so how have you set up our Mishnah? As a case of where the father, husband, is not going ahead and supporting them. What was the top of Tzadik Gimel 93a? So according to the opinion that says, and we've seen this before, that a master could say to his servant, work for me, but I'm not providing you with mazonos. So then this makes sense. Sorry, according to the opinion who says the master can't say that. But according to the opinion that says, but according to the opinion that says that a master doesn't have the ability to say to a servant, work for me and I'm not going to support you. How do you set this up? Ella, rather, I will say both cases are talking about a situation where the father, husband, is not providing mizonos. Ubaha Pligi, the Mar Sara Yachol, Umar Sara Ein Yachol. This is Machlokes. The Machlokes is, does the master have the ability to say, work for me, but I'm not providing mazonos? Rabbi Yochanan the Amar, Yachol Harav, Shavek Masnisim Va'avid Kibraisa. And Rabbi Yochanan says that a master can do this. He would set aside the Mishnah and hold like a brisa. That doesn't make any sense. Ella, the Koli Alma Mishal Shamayim Hu Ochal. Rather, I will say everyone agrees that the entitlement of a worker to go ahead and eat is a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'lo matzi katzitz. And therefore, technically speaking, while a person can negotiate on their own behalf to forego that right, they really can't negotiate that on behalf of anyone else. Umay kotetz am Rav Oshia. So what does mean Rav Oshia says kotetz? Mizonos. Ultimately, that's actually referring to actual support itself. Mizonos. Tikabasi kabe behemto teven nakutzla. Ultimately, because also you can set up the parallel case by a behemoth, by an animal that is talking about straw. Ella b'hakam ifligi. So what is the machlokas? The mar savar mishalohu ochel, umar savar mishalachilim ochel. So also you have to say that the entire machlokas, right over here, is going back to our core machlokas, which is what is the nature of the entitlement of a worker to eat? Is it an extension of his wage, or ultimately again, is it considered to be a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So I both say, the Gemara seems to leave this unresolved. So how do we pass? And I both say this is incredibly important, right? Because remember, this is not just academic. This is, at the core of this, what this really represents is the ability of a worker to assign this right. So let's say again, I hire Reuven to work in my field. Reuven has the right to eat while he works. Reuven wants to assign this right to his wife. I'm not going to eat while I work, but I'd like my wife to be able to partake of the produce while I'm working. Is it an assignable right or not? So again, it depends. If it's considered to be an extension of his wage, so the same way Reuven could say to me, listen, don't pay me, pay my wife. So again, he has the right to do that. So then he would be able to assign this right also to his wife. But if it's Mishal Shamayim, if it's a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then ultimately the gift is given to the worker and to no one else, and therefore it's not assignable. So we'll say, how do we paskin? So the Rambam paskins in Hilchos Schirus, and we're going to see this actually a couple of times. We're going to see this a couple of times, but the Rambam writes over here, Hilchos Schirus, Parak Yud Beis Halach Yud Gimel, the Gemara says, if a poel, right? Poel she'amar tenu le'ishti ubanai mashani ochel, o she'amar harini nosin ma'at mizeh shenatalti lechol le'ishti ubanai. So again, a worker says, I want to take my right of consumption, assign it to my wife, assign it to my kids. Ein shomin lo. We do not listen to the worker. Why? Shelo zichsa Torah ela lepol atzmo. The entitlement was given to the worker and the worker alone. So therefore, again, we do not view the right of consumption as an extension of the worker's wage. Rather, we view it ultimately, again, as a gift that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given him, and therefore that gift is only given to the worker and is unassignable. Beautiful. Mishnah. I must say now, the truth is we're not finished with that sugya yet. There's still more to it. So let's take a look. Mishnah. Kot seitz adam ayidei atzmo ayidei beno ubito hagidolim. So we'll say now, again, this is exactly what we just learned. So remember again, I hire Reuven. Reuven comes to work, himself, his wife, his kids, his servants. So Reuven decides to say, listen, Silber, here's the deal. I won't eat, pay me an extra $100. That works. And he could do this on behalf of himself, his adult children, his servants, Aidei Ishto, B'mei Sheish Bandas. In other words, we're both say, so Reuven and the working party, right, whoever he's bringing in, have the ability to make this arrangement as long as they are adults, because as adults they have das, and with das, they could choose to forego certain entitlements. Aval, Eino Kotzitz Aidei B'no Ubidu Aktanim. I would say, but he can't negotiate this on behalf of his minor children. V'lo Aidei Avdov Shivchas Aktanim, nor could he negotiate this on behalf of his minor servants. V'lo Aidei Behemto, nor could he go ahead and negotiate this on behalf of his animal. Why? B'mnei she'in bahen das. So I'll say now all of this makes sense, right? Because if you view this right to eat as a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then ultimately, again, you could give up the gift as long as what? You have das. If you don't have das, you can't give up the gift, nor can someone else give up the gift on your behalf. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, whereas Reuven could negotiate on behalf of his adult children, his adult avodim, his wife, when it comes to his minor children, or his animal for that matter, they don't have the das to give up the right, to give up the gift, and therefore ultimately, again, they're entitled to eat. So we've also seen this before. So remember again, I hire workers to go ahead and work on my Nata Ravai. Remember again, what's Nata Ravai? Fourth year produce, essentially treated like Meiser Sheni, you have to eat it in Yerushalayim. I hire workers to work on my Nata Ravai. Hari Elu, Lo yochlu. So the workers are not allowed to eat, right? Because remember again, at the end of the day, you can't eat Nata Ravai outside of Yerushalayim. Im lo hodian, bro. So what happens if I didn't tell the workers, right? I hired them to work with produce. I failed to disclose that the produce was Nata Ravai. So the workers show up in my field and they're expecting to what? To work and to eat. And to eat. So what's going on over here? So what's the halach? If I didn't disclose, poda u'machilan. Ultimately, I have to redeem some produce so that they could eat while they work. Similarly, we saw all this. We saw all this in today's daf. So Gemara says nisparsu agulov. So similarly, again, if I hire workers to go ahead and put back together a cake of pressed figs that fell apart, or to reseal barrels, so we'll say in general, the workers can't eat. Why can't they eat? Because in both of these cases, the produce is already subject to meiser. Remember again, what have we established? That Allah a worker is only permitted to eat from produce before it reaches the stage of being chayiv in meiser. Now again, so therefore in these cases, he can't eat. What happens if I didn't disclose that the produce he's going to be working with is subject to meiser? Then ma'aser u'ma'achilan. Then ultimately, once again, I have to tithe some produce so that he has the ability to go ahead and consume it. Shomrei peiros ochlin mehilchos medina v'alominatora. So this is very interesting. Now, up until this point in time, whenever we're speaking about workers, we've always been speaking about people who are literally physically laboring in the field. Now, we saw the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah said, whether you're working with your hands, your feet, your shoulder, right? But you're physically working. What about a watchman? So what about someone who's guarding the field? So he's not actively going ahead and physically working, but he's guarding the field. So what's the halacha? So the Mishnah says over here, guards, they eat mehilchos medina. Now we'll say hilchos medina means, look at actually no, sorry. Hilchos medina Rashi says, kivar nagu came. Hilchos medina means custom. It's customary to allow guards in a field to consume a produce, which I will say have halom in Torah. But biblically, they're not entitled to. Biblically, guards are not entitled to eat, but minhag Medina, customarily we allow them to eat. Says the Gemara. So I'll say, let's analyze this. Now we'll say, the great part is we already dealt with the entire first part of the Mishnah. We've already learned on Amud Beis, on Salik Beis, Amud Beis. So therefore, the Gemara really jumps right to the last line. So Shomrei Peiros. So let's talk about guards for just a moment. Amar Rav, Lo Shana Ela Shomrei Ganos Upardesin. So Rav says this is referring ultimately again to guards of Ganos Upardesin, gardens and orchards. Now we'll say, what does this mean? The Havile Mechubar B'Shah She'in Gemar Melacha Hilchach Min HaTorah Lo Achil V'Achil Mehilchos Medina. The kol shekin ose b'mechubar ki go menachish to achal b'minhag Medina. So we'll say. So Rav says like this: when we speak about this idea that guards get to eat mehilchos Medina, we're talking about attached produce, right? Attached produce. However, the Gemara says aval shomrei gitos va'aremos ochlim min haTorah. Now let's say that ultimately, again, those who go ahead and watch. Now, a gat is a wine press or piles of grain, they have the ability to go ahead and eat mid oraisa. Now what's the logic? Rashi says, Shomri gitos va'aremos, achlo nigmara malachta l'maiser, ochel af min haTorah kidin osa v'talish. So we'll say, but again, if they're going out and they're guarding detached produce, that of course is not yet subject to meiser. So Rav wants to suggest that they get to eat even midoraisa. Shmuel disagrees. Shmuel says no. Lo shana ela shomri gitos va'aremos. So we'll say ultimately again, Shmuel says like this. Shmuel says that when we speak about this idea that a guard gets to eat based on what we'll call minhag hamakom, right? Based on custom. This is referring to a guard who is guarding detached produce. Let's say, for example, in a vat, right, in a press, or piles of grain that are detached but not yet subject to trumas and maisrus. That's when he gets to eat from minhag Medina. So the Gemara says, Aval shomrei ganos upardisin eino ochlin lo min haTorah v'lo mehilchos Medina. But again, I will say, if the guard is watching, literally again, orchards or gardens, halacha l'maisa, he doesn't get to eat at all. He doesn't get to eat at all. Now, the logic over there is that halacha l'maisa, he's going ahead and guarding attached produce, and he's not actively doing anything. So if he's guarding attached produce that's attached to the ground, he doesn't get to eat at all. So let's analyze this. The Gemara says, what's the logic over here? Kasavar mishamer lav ke'osa maisedami. So this is incredible, because Shmuel, in his essence, holds that the act of guarding is not tantamount to the performance of an action. So Rabbi say, isn't this interesting? This fundamental achlokes over here is, what is the nature of guarding? Is guarding considered to be working or not? Shmuel holds guarding is not working. Now guarding is not working. Legabe this halacha, right? This halacha. So this halacha that entitles a worker to eat, it's dafka, a worker who is physically involved in a physical act of labor. But kind of standing around and guarding, that is not a physical act of labor regarding the halachic entitlement of consumption. The Gemara said, well, let's analyze this. So Masiv Rav Acha bar Ravuna, Hamishamer Sapara Metami Begadim. Listen to this. The halacha is now paraduma. Anyone involved in paraduma, generally becomes tameh, right? Rabbi said this is the great chok of paraduma. So paraduma, right, is there to make people tahar, but yet anyone involved in the preparation, ultimately again of the para is going to become tameh. So the Gemara says, someone who's guarding the para ultimately becomes tameh. What do you see from here? That guarding is considered to be a maisa, to which the Gemara says, Vi'i amrit misham la kausa maisa dami. And if you say that guarding is not an action, samay metayim begadim, so why does someone guarding the para become tameh? No, because sometimes if you're guarding the animal, you might also move a limb. So again, when you're moving a limb, that's considered to be an active working with the animal itself. All right. Maser Rav Kana, Hamishamer arba v'chamesh mikshos harize lo yimali kreso me'echa mehen elami kol echad ve'echad ocha lefi chashbon. So this is interesting. Let's say I am watching. Now literally mikshos means 5 fields of gourds. I'm going in and watching 5 fields of gourds. So what's the halacha? You shouldn't eat your full fill from one field. Rather, what should you do? Equally distribute your consumption amongst all of the fields that you are watching. Now, if you say that guarding is not like an actual act of labor, why should you be entitled to eat at all? I'm saying about ashi ba'akurin shana. We're talking about detached produce. So we'll say, detached produce. Good. Detached produce. So the verse says, remember again, according to Shmuel's whole model is that when it is attached produce, right? When it is attached produce, then ultimately, again, a guard doesn't have the ability to eat at all. When it's detached produce that is not yet subject to meiser, that's when he has the right to eat alts minagamedina. Right, based on common custom. So for the Gemara says, maybe over here he's not guarding attached gourds, rather he's guarding detached gourds. So the Gemara says, but if it's detached, then it's subject to meiser. And if it's subject to meiser, then the worker no longer has the right to go ahead and consume it. We're talking about a case where, like the pikas, we'll say pikas, Rashi says over here, is like the flower, like the bud that's on there. If the bud is not removed, then halacha l'meiser is still subject to meiser. So Rav Ashi seems to say that Shmuel seems to be correct. Isnan, elu ochlim min Torah. We'll say these are the following people who eat midaraisa. Hosem mechuber lekarka b'shas gemar melacha. Ubitalish. So we'll say, remember again, this goes back to our core ideas. Who is permitted to go ahead and eat, right? What kind of labor is permitted to go ahead and eat midaraisa? Someone who goes ahead and is working with mechuber, right? Attached produce, b'shas gemar melacha, when it's fully finished produce, but not yet subject to meiser, ubetalosh, and the same will apply with detached produce, right? Same criteria. Detached produce that's fully formed and not yet subject to meiser. So the Gemara says, Mechlal di'ika delo ka'achal min Torah el mehilchos medina, which infers that there are people who are not entitled to eat midaraisa, but they are entitled to eat based on minhag medina. Who is that? So according to Shmuel, that's ultimately again a shomer, a guard, who's able to eat based on minhag medina with detached produce. I aim a seifa ve'elu she'in ochlin, yet ve'elu she'in ochlin. But look at the seifa. The seifa says that halacha l'maisa, there are some who are not able to eat at all My ain on ochel. What does it mean they're not able to eat? If you're telling me that it means they can't eat midaraisa, but they can eat what we'll call, both say minhag Medina is not even midrabanan. It just means based on common local practice. Hainareisha saying the same thing. Right? They must be introducing to us this concept that there are people who are not permitted to eat at all. At all, either again midaraisa or based on minhag Medina. Umaynihu, and we'll say which people are these? We'll say must be talking about people who are not permitted to go ahead and eat when the produce is attached to the ground. When what? When the produce is not fully formed. So we'll say, so remember again, in general, a regular laborer, if he's working with produce that's not finished and it's attached to the ground, he's not allowed to eat. Remember the paradigmatic example of that? Paradigmatic example of that was weeding the onions. Right, the worker's weeding the onions, he's pulling out the weeds. So again, in that case, he's not allowed to eat. Why? Because remember, even though he's dealing with mechuber lekarka, the produce is not yet finished. So because it's not yet finished, you're not allowed to eat at all. Right? Midaraisa, minhag Medina. Furthermore, the chol shekein shomer ganos upardesos. All the more so, someone who is a guard and is just watching ganos upardesos also can't eat. Okay, so we'll say, Salach Lamaisa, how do we paskin? And this, by the way, this is an important sugya. So we'll say, so now we're introducing a brand new form of laborer, which is a guard. So a guard is unique because on one hand, he's absolutely performing a service for which he gets paid for, but it's not active labor. So we'll say, so now so look at the progression over here, right? So first we've established that the entitlement to eat while you work is a biblical gift. It's not a form of wage, it's a biblical gift, therefore non-assignable. After we've established that, who gets that gift? Is it only someone who's actively working, or is it anyone who is providing a service associated with the field? So for example, does a guard get that gift? So here we go, right? So Rambam will say all the magic happens in Hilchos Schiros Perek Yud Beis. That's it. Shomrei gitos va'aremos v'chol davra talosh min hakarka shadayin lo nigmar malachta l'maiser ochlin mehilchos medina shashomer eino ka'osa maiser. So we'll say salach l'maiser we paskin like Shmuel. Pass like Shmuel that if someone is guarding a field where the produce is attached to the ground, there's no entitlement to eat. But if he is guarding an area of detached produce, gitos aremos means wine presses and piles of grain, or anything that is detached from the ground, while the produce is not yet subject to meiser, he's permitted to eat. So again, if a guard is guarding attached produce, he doesn't have the right to eat. But if he is guarding detached produce that is not yet subject to trumas and maestros, he is permitted to eat based on Hilchos Medina. So we'll say, what really comes out of here is as follows. What's the core halacha? The core halacha is that the entitlement to eat while you work is dafka someone who is engaged in physical labor. Physical labor, that's it. You're picking grapes off the vine, you could eat. You're picking figs off the tree, you could eat. So me'ikra din, a guard is not entitled to that gift. Guard is not entitled. Minhag Medina, common practice says that when he's guarding detached produce, we allow him to eat, as long as it's not subject yet to meiser. Good. And we'll see that's sugi. Let's go. Well, there's a great Mishnah out of us. Arba Shomrim. We'll say it is so fascinating that this Mishnah is buried here, like in the middle of Bava Metzia, right? Like we should have had this in the beginning, like in the beginning of Bava Kama, right? Although we did a little bit in certain respects. Arba Shomrim. There are 4 different types of custodians. What are they? Shomer Chinam, Shoel, Nosei Sachar, Va'asochar. So I'll say, what are they? Unpaid custodian, a borrower, a paid custodian, and a renter. Shomer Chinam nishpal hakol. So we'll say Shomer Chinam. Remember, we'll say, what is a Shomer Chinam generally liable for? Shomer Chinam is only liable for one thing, which is pshia, negligence. So in general, if something happens to the object, a Shomer Chinam is positive. But we've established already, it's not just in other words, as much as we believe everyone, we don't believe anyone, right? In other words, that halacha l'maisa, something happens, right? The Shomer Chinam, I give the Shomer Chinam my ox. I come back, he says, I'm sorry, Baruch Ta'anemes, it died. So again, the halacha is, he's pater, but he has to swear. right? So he has to take a shvuah, and once he swears, whatever, right, we accept his oath, and he is pater from everything. Nishba ala kol. Hashoal m'shalim etzkol. Conversely, a borrower has complete responsibility. Right, a borrower is liable for everything. Remember again, your level of responsibility is directly related to your rights of usage. So since a borrower has complete rights of usage, therefore halacha l'maisa, he has complete liability. So shol m'shalim esakol. No say schar. So we'll say again, a shomer sachar, a paid custodian, v'hasocher, and a renter, nishba'in al hashvura va'al hashvuya va'al hamesa. So we'll say, so remember again, a shomer sachar, as well as a renter, are pater for own sin, right? They're pater for extenuating circumstances. They have no idea now, but they're chayiv, right? They're chayiv. I'm sorry. So they're able to swear shvura. The animal literally breaks. Shvuya, it's taken captive. Mesa, it dies. So we'll say these are all examples of extenuating circumstances. So if something, right, if they claim extenuating circumstances, they swear to support their claim, and then they are pater. However, but if the animal is lost, right, not extenuating circumstance, it's lost, or the animal ultimately is stolen, they are chayiv for that. Okay, says the Gemara, Tana Arba Shomrim. We'll say, who is the opinion that says that there are 4 different types of custodian? Rav Nachman, Rav Baravua, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Meir, Rav Nachman, Mi Ika de Leslie Arba Shomrim. I don't understand. Is there someone who doesn't agree that there are 4 custodians? And Shomer Chinam, Shomer Sachar, Socher, and Shoel. Everyone agrees with that. Is somebody who disagrees with those categories? Man Tana Socher Kino say Schar. Now what we're asking is, who is the opinion who equates ultimately, again, Shomer Sachar, a paid custodian, with a renter, who equates their halachas. So the Gemara says, that's Rabbi Meir. So I'll say, so remember, Rabbi Meir is the one who says that a paid custodian and a renter have the same halacha, namely, that they are going to be pater for own sin, they'll be pater for extenuating circumstances, but chayiv for everything else. So who is the opinion that links those 2 custodians, a renter and the shomer sachar? That's Rabbi Meir. We hear Rabbi Meir says just the opposite. The Sanya, sochar keitzad mishalim. We learn, right? How does a socher? What's the level of liability that a renter has? Rabbi Meir Omer kishomer chinam. Rabbi Meir says that a paid right, that a renter is like a shomer chinam. Rabbi Yehuda Omer kishomer sachar. Rabbi Yehuda is like a shomer sachar. Rabbi Baravua ipcha katani. So Rabbi Baravua, he flipped the shitos. Okay, fine. Ihachi arba shlosheninu. So we'll say if that's the case, there aren't really 4 categories of shomrim. What are there? There's really 3. Why? Because we just got finished saying that a renter, a socher, has the same halacha as a shomer sachar, as a paid custodian. So there really aren't 4 categories of custodians, there are 3. To which the Gemara says, you're right. The truth is, there are 4 types of custodians, but those 4 fit into 3 frameworks of halacha. So in other words, Shomer Chinam has his halacha, Shoel has his halacha, and there are 2 different things. There's a paid custodian and the socher, and they are different halachically, but yet again, their responsibility is really the same. Interesting. So I'm going to tell us a story. There was a shepherd who was tending to the flock on the banks of the Papa River. Okay, Sarik Chadaminayo v'nafal. One of the animals slipped, fell into the water, and was swept away, died. Asla kamei de Rabba. So they came before Rabba, and Opatre, and Rabba says the shomer is pater. Right, the shepherd. Now, we'll say. Now, remember again. In this case, remember again. Bepashtos. What is a shepherd? What is a shepherd? A shepherd is, what is he? What category? Shomer sachar. Hey, Bepashtos. He's a paid custodian. He's a paid custodian. So Rabba comes to Rabba. So the shepherd says, "What's my liability?" Rabba says, "You're pater." Why, Rabba? So remember again, a shomer sachar, a paid custodian, is free from liability for an ones, for an extenuating circumstance. Here the animal slipped, the animal was swept away. What are you going to do? So Amalei, my havid. Rabba said, "What should the shepherd have done?" What should the shepherd say? Now, this is all presupposing, by the way, that it wasn't negligent for him to have the animals on the bank of the Papa River, right? All of this is presupposing that there was no negligence. So if there's no negligence, then by definition is an extenuating circumstance. If it's extenuating, then again, there was nothing he could have done. Amud Beis, So Rabba says, Hanatar kidinatri inshi. The shepherd watched the animals in a normal accordance with the way people watch their animals. Therefore, Rashi says, Ve'ina veda ela ones. So Rabba says, so this is the shita of Rabba. We're going to see this echo time and time again. That Rabba says that halacha l'maisa, the shepherd, who is a shomer sachar, as long as he is acting in conformance with normative standards, if something happens to the animal, that's an ones, that's an extenuating circumstance, and the shepherd is therefore not liable. What more could he have done? So only Abaye says, okay, so Rabba, let's talk this out a little bit. El mi'ata, all the masa be'idna da'ayel inshi. So I'll say, listen to this. Let's say again, same case. A shepherd is watching his animals, and the shepherd went into the city at a time that people normally go into the city. Now, both say, this is actually very interesting. So apparently, I will say, it was common for shepherds to leave their flocks alone for a little bit. Right? In other words, and that wasn't considered to be negligent. So let's say again, the shepherd, he has a lunch break, so he goes into the city for a couple of minutes, and while he's gone, something happens to one of the sheep. So Abaye says to Rabbi, what would you say? In that case, is the shepherd also pater? Amarle in. Rabbi said yes. Gana porta beidna de ganu inshi. I will say now also, let's say you live in a place where it was common for a person to take a nap in the middle of the day, and even the shepherd falls asleep a little bit, and during his nap break, something happens to one of the animals. Is the shepherd still going to be pater? So how can I be the pater? Amalei in. So Rabbi said yes. So we'll say, so Rabba's consistent, and Rabba's shita, which is really quite interesting, is essentially like this: that as long as you're doing your job, and you are acting in conformance with normative standards, if something happens to the animal, that's called an ones. And a shomer sachar is pater on onsim. Okay, fascinating. So the Gemara says, Esvei, Sabayre is the kasha, Elohim, onsin, sheshomer sachar pater alehen. So I will say, so now the Brisa says like this: what's an example of onsin? What is the example of extenuating circumstances for which a shomer is pater? Kigon, quotes over here the pasuk from Eov, Vatipol shva vatikachem v'eshanaarim hikul lefi charev. So I will say, so the example that the Gemara brings in this pasuk of like an ones is like an attack, like a surprise attack. That's an ones. That's an ones. And I was about to say, what's an ones? An ones is a situation that you cannot have prevented. But if you look at these circumstances that Abaye is describing over here, right? The shepherd left the flock and went into the city. Something happened to the animal. Is that preventable? Is that preventable? Yeah, he didn't have to go into the city. Or he takes a nap. And what? And one of the animals is killed while he's taking a nap. Preventable? Yeah. So I'll say what's interesting over here is, on one hand, the shepherd is not acting in an irresponsible fashion, but the losses are preventable. So what Rabba seems to be saying is, the definition of ones is anything that happens because you are acting irresponsibly. But if you are acting in conformance with normative standards and something happens, that's called an ones. Abaye says, no, it's not. An ones is an unavoidable mishap. And all of these cases are avoidable. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, Amarle hasam bechazani masa. Now I'll say that pasuk is referring to guards of the city. This is interesting. The definition of ones depends on the level or extent of your responsibilities. A shomer, a shepherd, has one set of responsibilities, but let's say someone's guarding a city. So I'll say, if someone's guarding a city, which means everyone puts the security of the city is in their hands, they have a heightened level of responsibility. So apparently a shepherd is permitted to take a nap. A shepherd is permitted to go into the city for a couple of minutes and leave the flock, because that's normal shepherding practices. A guard is mamish never permitted to let his guard down. And therefore, if he does, his threshold of ones is much lower. So let's listen to this. Until what point? So this is, by the way, I just want to point out a really interesting machlokes Abaye and Rabba. Right? Rabba holds that as long as you're doing what you're supposed to be doing in conformance with normative practice, so if anything happens beyond that, that's ones. Abaye seems to be saying, no, ones really means something you could not have prevented. But if you could have prevented it, then halacha l'maisa, you can't claim ones. Really interesting. Say Silimar is the kasha, ad masai shomer sachar chayav lishmar. So we'll say, what is the extent of responsibility that a shomer sachar, that a paid custodian has? So the Gemara says, ad kidei hayisi vayom achalani choriv v'karach ba'alayla. So we'll say, Yaakov Avinu. When Yaakov Avinu goes out and tells Lavan, right, when he's ready to leave Lavan's house, and Lavan's giving him a little bit of a hard time, Yaakov Avinu says, you don't understand how hard I worked for you, right? Literally, again, by day and by night. During the day, I was eating cold, and at night, the ice, and everything. Yaakov Avinu was telling Lavan, I was on duty by day and by night. The Gemara says that's the responsibility of a shomer sachar. So it says that's obviously a much heightened level of responsibility, much more than Rabbah is espousing. Aralei hasam nami bichazane masa. No, Yaakov and Rabbi say took on almost like a heightened level of responsibility, like the guard of a city. Like the guard of a city. So we'll say, so again, Yaakov, you can't learn out the responsibility of a regular shomer sachar from Yaakov Avinu, right? Yaakov Avinu is taking on a much greater level of personal responsibility, like the guard of a city. All right, incredible. Armalei ati Yaakov Avinu chazan masahava. I don't understand. Armalei lelavan natri lecha netirusi yisera kechazani masa. The Gemara says Yaakov Avinu was the guard of a city. He wasn't the guard of a city. He was a shepherd. No, what he was saying to Lavan was, we'll say, and this makes sense in the context of the pasuk. Saying to Lavan was, Lavan, you don't understand what I did for you. I took on a heightened level of responsibility for the flock as if I was a guard of the city. But perhaps under normal circumstances, but under normal circumstances, a shepherd who is a shomer sachar is not chayav for this heightened level of responsibility. All right, Esvei, Rosh Roa V'iniach Edru Baleir. Well, this is an interesting case over here. Right, I hire a shepherd, Ruvain. Ruvain is watching my flock, right? What happened? Ruvain left the flock and he came into the city for a little bit. Now remember again, based on what we saw before, halacha l'maisa, it seems to be that was common, right? It's interesting that the flocks were left on their own a little bit. The shepherd would come into the city. So now Ruvain left behind the flock. He came into the city. Ubaz ze'ev v'taraf, right? And a wolf came and killed one of the sheep. Uba'ari v'daras, or a lion came, right, and pounced on one of the animals. So it says, what's the halacha? Ein omdin, ilo haya sham haya matzil. Now we'll say, we don't say, now you can say, Ruvain, you're at fault. Because Ruvain, had you been there, the wolf wouldn't have attacked, the lion wouldn't have attacked. Elo omdin also, im yachal lahatzil chayiv, ve'im lav pater. So we'll say, this is interesting. So now, what do? We kind of evaluate the circumstances. Here's what we look at. If Ruvain was there, would he have been able to save my sheep or not? If he would have been able to save the sheep, then halacha l'maisa, he's chayiv. Ruvain's chayiv. And if he wouldn't have been able to save the sheep, then he's pater. So let's analyze this. My love the al be'ini the aisle inshi. Are we not talking about a case where Ruvain came into the city at a time when it was normal for the shepherd to come into the city? And therefore we'll say, what is this? This is a contradiction to Rabbah, right? Because Rabbah said, if the shepherd is acting in a normal way and something happens, the shepherd is not chayiv. The shepherd is not chayiv. That's called an ones. From here you see, Rabbah say, that we're saying over here that even if the shepherd entered into the city on a regular break, scheduled break, permitted break, we still look at, if he was there, could he have saved the animal? And if the answer to that is yes, he's going to be liable. So Kashan Rabbah, to which the Gemara says, Lo, the al be'idnei delo aili inshe. Now we're talking about a case where Ruvain, the shepherd, came into the city at a time where it wasn't the sanctioned break. Right? It wasn't the appropriate time. He came in at a non-appropriate time, and therefore we assess whether or not he's liable. Ihachi, amai pater. So we'll say, if that's the case, then why should he be pater at all? He should be chayiv. After all, we'll say, what do we call this? We've had this before. Tchila sovibshia v'sofa ba'ones chayiv. But remember, we've spoken this extensively. You could have a case of, we'll say, of tchila sovibshia, which means the beginning of the act is negligent, but the end turns out to be extenuating circumstance. So I will say, in that scenario, what's the halacha? Tchilasa v'pshia v'sofa ba'ones is chayiv. So if that's the case, Ruvain should definitely be liable in this case. No, what's the case? I will say, listen to this. The shama kol aryeh va'al. I will say, no, what's the case? It wasn't a sanctioned break. It wasn't a scheduled break. But you know what did happen? Ruvain's guarding the flock. And I will say, what does he hear? What does he hear? The roar of the lion. I will say, what does Ruvain do when he hears the roar of the lion? Right? Run. right? Every man for himself. He runs. I will say now, interestingly enough, if that's I will say now, by the way, everyone would agree that Reuven, certainly the shepherd, has an obligation to put himself in mortal danger to save the flock. So if that's what we're talking about over here, a case where he heard the lion roar and he ran, so what's the shayla? Also. So we'll say, so now remember again, so we'll say, now let's put this case together. I hired Reuven to watch my flock, right? Reuven is a shepherd, he's a shomer sacher. So now what we're saying is, Reuven went ahead and went into the city, and at the time that he went into the city, right, the lion came and killed one of the sheep. Is he liable? So the Gemara says, so now the way we're setting it up is, Reuven was doing his job. He heard the roar of the lion, and he ran. So we'll say, now the Brisa said we analyze. If Reuven could have saved the sheep, so then he's going to be chayv. If he couldn't have saved the sheep, then he's not chayv. I don't understand. If there's a lion, what could he possibly have done? To which the Gemara says, here's what he could have done. He could have gathered other shepherds, right? Other shepherds, and ultimately, again, with sticks. And together they could have repelled the lion. So we'll say, by the way, it's actually a tremendous, right? I don't know who you're getting to volunteer for that job. I will say, but also it's a tremendous yisur. We'll say, what does this mean? See, even lions will only attack when they sense a vulnerability, right? Literally solitary vulnerability. If you get other shepherds together, the lion backs down. See, I will say, there's an incredible Musar Haskell in this, which is, when there is achdus, right, and when there is unity, and when there is a group, you could face down any lion. You could face down any predatory animal. When the shepherd is alone, right, when a yid is alone, so they are incredibly vulnerable to many type of dangers in this world. But ultimately, again, when there's a group of shepherds, I will say, remember again, our history is in the field of shepherding. But when there are a bunch of shepherds together, maklos, they're armed with their sticks, they're armed with their Torah, they're armed with their mitzvos, they're armed with their ma'asim tovim, they're able to face down any threat together. Incredible. Ihachi, ma'ir shomer sachar, afilu shomer chinam nami. Suppose if that's the case, then why is this dafka unique to a shomer sachar? The same halacha should apply even to a shomer chinam. In other words, that even a shomer chinam should be obligated to go ahead, get the other shepherds together, get them with their sticks, and repel the lion. To which the rest of us is actually very interesting. Even a shomer chinam, if the shomer chinam, right, is watching the flock, and he could have repelled the predatory animal with other shepherds and sticks, he's chayiv to do so. So which is very interesting. Shomer chinam bechinam, shomer sachar besachar. This is fascinating, I will say. A shomer chinam, you're right. Both a shomer chinam and a shomer sachar, I will say, if they sense a threat and they're able to repel the threat by getting other people, they're both obligated to do so. Here's the difference. A shomer chinam is obligated to go out and gather people, assuming that he could gather people for free. Right? A shomer sachar is obligated to gather people, even if the shomer sachar has to pay them to come. Va'ad kama, and how much does the shomer sachar have to be willing to pay? So the Gemara says, ad kama ad kidei demehen. Ultimately, again, up until the value of the animals themselves. So we'll say, I don't understand. So we'll say that's pretty dramatic. So what you're saying over here is a shomer sachar's liability is such that he has to do whatever he has to do to guard the flock, even if it means paying up until the value of the animal, which then means that potentially even the shomer sachar is out of pocket for all of this. So we'll say, so that would mean essentially that a shomer sachar is even chayiv for own sin. Where do we ever see that a shomer sachar is chayiv for own sin? No. The hadar shakal dememi balabayis. Now we'll say, interestingly enough, in this case, the shomer sachar is not going to be out of pocket. Rather, what it means is, if it costs the shomer sachar money to go ahead and rent people to guard the animal, to repel the predatory animal, he could come back to the balabayis, and the balabayis has to reimburse him for any expenses incurred. Very interesting. Amarle. So we'll say ultimately, again, if that's the case, we'll say, so let's play this out for just a second. Now what we're saying is the shomer sachar, right? If he senses a danger, is chayiv to go ahead and even hire other people to help guard the animals. And how much money could he spend in order to guard the flock? Up until the value of the flock. If that's the case, then what benefit has the shomer sachar provided for me, for the owner of the animals? So it turns out, Rabbi say, that he saved my flock at what? At the expense of the flock. So I don't understand. It's kind of like either way, it's a loss. To which the Gemara says, no, it's not. I'll tell you why. The Gemara says, nafkamina l'kshur d'chiyusa inam l'terchi yisirasa. So I will say, with my flock, we have a relationship. We understand each other. Right? So because I have a relationship with my flock, so therefore, again, there is a benefit for saving my flock. Right? It's not a wash. Furthermore, again, I will say, if my flock is totally wiped out and I have to replenish it, there's a lot of tircha on that. So I will say, so Arav Chistav Rabba Baravuna lo sir lehuda Rabba damrilei lahachi yavi igra linture le nitirusa yisirasa. So I will say, so now we'll just finish with this today. So Rav Chistav and Rabba Baravuna did not rejected this view of Rabbah. So we'll say, so remember again, Rabbah's whole chap is that if you are a shomer sachar, you are entitled to act in conformance with normative shmira standards. And if something happens to the animal outside of those standards, then halacha ma'aseh, that's called an ones. The Gemara and Abaye argues on that, and the Gemara ends off by saying that Rav Chisda and Rabbi Rav Huna also reject that. And they say the whole reason I'm paying a shomer is for him to be on duty when? All of the time. You're giving up your nap. You're giving up your time to go into the city, and I want you to be on guard. And if something happens when you take a nap or when you go into the city, ultimately, again, you're going to chai. So we'll stop over here for today. So I'm just pointing out that, again, we're ending off really in the midst of a very important question, which is, what is the definition of ones? Is the definition of ones anything that happens beyond the scope of your normative responsibilities? Or another definition of ones is anything that happens that you could not have prevented. That machlokes Abaye Rava will say, shkoyach will say, tremendous, by the way. Excellent job. We did like a blot and a half today. Shkoyach, everyone. What a way to end the week. Incredible. Good Erev Shabbos. Shkoyach. All right, Chevron Zoom. Good Shabbos, everyone. Good Shabbos. Wonderful to see the whole Eretz Yisrael contingent with us. So beautiful, so wonderful. Good Shabbos in Eretz Yisrael. Good Shabbos Chutz La'aretz also. Shkoyach. It's Chutz to learn with all of you.